Hello everyone, it's Scott, and welcome to our look at March of the Machine, the Aftermath spoilers. And in this video, we're going to look at the enchantments from the set and also the one land. But before we get started, special thanks to Caffeinated Gamers for sponsoring our videos. Remember to like and subscribe to get further content from March of the Machine Aftermath and other sets that come out later this year. And let's get started looking at the enchantments from the Aftermath. So first we have Deification, which is 1 and a white mana for an enchantment. As Deification enters the battlefield, you choose a Planeswalker type. Planeswalkers you control of the chosen type have hexproof. So that's a great ability, giving your Planeswalkers hexproof, because you get to choose. Say, we've got several Planeswalkers in Standard right now that have multiple versions that are good. We've got 2 Teferis, we've got 2 Chandras, we've got 2 Wanderers, we've got 2 Ren, for example. All of those you could name with this card, and then they would have hexproof. And as long as you control a creature, if damage dealt to a Planeswalker you control of the chosen type would result in all loyalty counters on it being removed. Instead, all but one of those counters are removed. So as long as you've got a creature, in essence, your creature is preventing your Planeswalker from dying. So I think it's an interesting card. So I think mono white, because it's already using both copies of the Wanderer in it, I think probably we'll sideboard this in as possibly a main deck card, but certainly something in the sideboard if they're worried about their Planeswalkers dying. Next, we have Spark Rupture for 2 and a white mana. You get an enchantment, and when Spark Rupture enters the battlefield, you get to draw a card. So first of all, that's a good ability on the enchantment. You're getting value no matter what happens. You get to draw the card. Now, each Planeswalker with 1 or more loyalty counters on it loses all abilities and is a creature with power and toughness, each equal to the number of loyalty counters on it. So what Spark Rupture does is it turns off all of your Planeswalker abilities that you might have, but also, more importantly, your opponent might have. So I think this is a very good sideboard card in Standard to play against decks that are using a lot of Planeswalkers. Like, I can see this in the Soldiers deck, to prevent, getting hit by the Wandering Emperor, for example, when it would flash in. So I think that's a really good ability for Standard. And we do see quite a few Planeswalkers across the many different decks that are seeing play in Standard. So I think it definitely has a place as a sideboard card. And it might even have some viability in other formats where we see a lot of Planeswalkers. Next, we have Tolarian Contempt for 3 and 2 blue mana. You get an enchantment when Tolarian Contempt enters the battlefield. Put a reject counter on each creature your opponent controls. And at the beginning of your end step, for each opponent, choose up to 1 target creature they control with a rejection counter on it. That creature's owner puts it on the top or bottom of their library. So this is a great ability. I mean, 5 is a lot of mana, but what you're going to be able to do is turn after turn after turn after you play this, all of the creatures that they might have on the battlefield, you're going to be able to choose 1 each turn to send either to the top or bottom of your opponent's library, and turn after turn kind of whittling down what they have in play, but also limiting their draws. Because they put it on the top, that means they're not seeing a new card, they're just getting that card back. And you can do this with other cards as you go, so it's going to limit the draw ability of an opponent, which I think is a good thing. Now, is this main deckable? Probably not, but it might be a sideboard option for some blue decks. Next, we have Training Ground. For a blue mana, you get an enchantment where activated abilities of creatures you control cost 2 less to activate. This effect can't reduce the mana in that cost to less than 1 mana. So if there is a deck that develops around activated abilities, this is a perfect card to go in that deck. But outside of that, I don't see it seeing much play in Standard, simply because reducing the cost of an activation of a creature, that's great, but if you don't have a bunch of creatures that have activated abilities, you're not getting much value out of it. Next, we have Leyline Immersion. For 3 and a green mana. You get an enchantment, that's an aura, and it enchants a legendary creature. An enchanted creature has Ward 2, and tap to add 5 mana in any combination of colors spend this mana to only cast spells. So I think this is a really interesting card. I don't know exactly where it goes at this point, but I can see this finding its way into any kind of Legends deck that uses green. And the reason I'm saying that is this, because the turn you put it into play on a legendary creature, which probably has already been in play, you're getting 5 mana to spend on top of the 4 you've already spent. So each turn you do this, you're churning 5 additional mana out, which means you can ramp into really, really large spells or really large creatures. And I think that value there is something that I think people will try to figure out how to make work in Standard. Next, we have Feast of the Victorious Dead. For a black and a white mana, you get an enchantment that at the beginning of your end step, if one or more creatures died this turn, you gain that much life and distribute that many +1/+1 counters among creatures you control. I like this card. I mean, it's an uncommon, but what it does is it gives value for when things die on your side, because you gain life. In addition to that, you get to put +1/+1 counters on one or more creatures equal to the number of creatures that died on a particular turn. So I think there's a place for this in Standard. Certainly, potentially, I don't know how main deckable it is, but I can see it as a sideboard card in a match where you need some life gain and you know your opponent's going to be killing your creatures with instant speed removal. You know, those target removal, like go for the throat, cut down, those kind of things. I think there's some value in that situation. Next, we have the Kenrith's Royal Funeral. For 2, a white and a black mana, you get a legendary enchantment. When the Kenrith's Royal Funeral enters the battlefield, exile up to 2 target legendary creature cards from your graveyard. You draw X cards and you lose X life, where X is the greatest mana value among cards exiled this way. I think right there, this is playable. And because you're getting some card draw, and I think that's valuable. You're going to lose a little bit of life, but you're getting, when you exile cards from your graveyard, you're going to get value from them, and that in and of itself is a good thing. And if you're exiling a 5 mana spell, you do lose 5 life, but you're going to gain 5 cards from that, which is a great value. Now, in addition to that, legendary spells you cast cost 1 less to cast for each card exiled with the Kenrith's Royal Funeral. So you exile 2 cards, all of a sudden all your legendary creatures cost 2 less, which means you're going to be able to start playing those cards that you just got out of the exiling of the 2 creatures or legendary creatures from your graveyard. You're going to start benefiting from that right away and being able to play things fast onto the board. And I think that in and of itself makes this very playable in Standard. Next, we have Nahiri's Resolve. For 3, a red and a white mana, you get an enchantment that creatures you control get +1 and have haste. So those are pretty good abilities there. I wish it wasn't 5 mana for that, but when we look at the next part of it, I think it probably is affordable enough where you might want to put a couple copies into a deck. So at the beginning of your end step, exile any number of non-token artifacts and or creatures you control. Return those cards to the battlefield under their owner's control at the beginning of your next upkeep. So what this does is it blinks everything. So you have the ability to blink all of your cards and get value from it re-triggering when they come back into play at the beginning of your upkeep. And when they come into play, they're going to have haste, which means that they're going to be able to attack the turn that they come into play. And then again, at the end of your turn, you can do the same thing. You can blink them again and get more value from them. And if you put Elish Norn, Mother of Machines, into your deck, then you shut off your opponent's abilities and you double your activated or triggered abilities when those cards come into play. And I can really see this as possibly part of an equipment deck with the 4 Mirrodin ability, because you blink the equipment, you leave the token, and at the beginning of your your next upkeep, you get to have another 2/2 token and that attached to that creature, and you're going to create more and more creatures that you're going to be able to attack with. I think there's a lot of value in that, so I think this is playable in the right deck for it. Next, we have our 1 land from the set, and that's Drannith Ruins. You get to tap it for colorless mana, and for 2, you can put 2 +1/+1 counters on target non-human creature that entered the battlefield this turn. So I think this is probably one of the weaker cards from the set, because I don't know if in Standard we're going to see this played very much. I like the ability to put +1/+1 counters on things, but that limitation of it being non-human and it has to be the turn that it entered play really places some limitations on the card, because in essence you've got to have a minimum of 4 mana to activate this if you only cast a 1 mana spell to put those 2 +1/+1 counters on it. So I think really in the end the benefits aren't worth the cost of it. So I think it's a nice card. I think conceptually it's good, but I think we're not going to see very much, if any of it, seeing play in Standard. And that's our look at enchantments from the Aftermath set. So I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you liked it. So remember to like and subscribe to our videos so you get more content like this in the future. And I'll be back with one more video as we look at the instants and sorceries from March of the Machine, the Aftermath. I'll see you next time.